We're going.
Welcome back, episode 2 of the Crossroads podcast.
It's so lame.
I've not been fired yet. I'm Kevin Hageland. I'm back for episode 2. Now, y'all, I feel like you're pretty entrenched. I'm the most replaceable piece here, but you brought me back for another week. That's delightful.
Man, listen, you brought this thing to life. We're here for it. Right, Wes?
Right.
Well, you look way less enthused about this.
Man.
Yeah, I am.
Wes, we're only a couple weeks from the start of baseball season, all right? Let's get fired up about that.
Thank goodness, yeah. Give us some applause for that. That's not applause.
That's good. That's baseball season music.
Random music. Is it?
So I got my mindset on you?
Now
It
stepping
does have a little bit of that vibe.
now stepping to the plate, Jason Collins.
Oh, man.
Oh no. Oh no.
Wrong button.
It happens. Don't look up our YouTube page from about a month ago. I might have had a little bit of a slip up that I needed to dive for the dump button. We will try to avoid any such conundrums here.
Yeah.
What do you guys want to update the world about? Do we want to talk about the basketball team at all?
Yeah, we do. And I assume by basketball team, you are referring to
The LeBron lovers.
the LeBron lovers, the team that I
Yes.
coach on Sunday nights.
Yes, I am. And
Yeah.
that sigh that you let out before you
Well, we lost last night. We were undefeated going into last night's game.
3-0.
And
3-0 versus the worst 3 teams in the league.
Yep. Well, no, two of them were real bad. One of them was pretty good. And then we hit a wall against the Ball Hogs, which found out they're from another church.
Oh, dear.
So yeah, so man, it was.
Now you're
pretty
the second best church team in a rec league in Rockwall.
Oh, no.
No, they were cool dudes, man. It was good. Even after they smoked us, we all gathered up and prayed at the end, so it was good.
That kind of attitude is not going to win you a rec league championship.
It's not,
though.
but I will tell you, there was one dude on their team that I'm pretty sure is Spider-Man because he got up off the ground without using his hands when he was on his back, like kicked his feet up and did like this
Hip
ninja.
up? Yeah.
Oh, dude.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I was just like, man, I gave him my card and I was like, do you need extra playing time? Because we got a place for you.
Do you guys have any players that you think could be trained to do that same move?
My money on our team, my money hands down. It's not close. Like the second place is not close, but Parker Shivak is
trying to go with
he's the GOAT. He's easily the quickest and most agile member of our team, and I think if he kicks those legs up, all of him's coming with him.
Okay. Well, I know we said we're going to keep this separate from the regular service.
Okay.
But I got to say,
Okay.
I learned something in regular service that I feel really dumb that I didn't know. I didn't know Generation Alpha, and I definitely didn't know Generation Beta.
Really?
So I am just out of the generational loop, apparently, but I loved it when you shouted out Wyatt and Generation
You were
Beta.
decades behind, Kevin.
I had no idea. I was with you all the way until you got to Generation Alpha, and I was like, what is that? I mean, I could understand the context, but I never heard that phrase.
Well, believe it or not, Generation Alpha is. They're as old as like 13 or 14 now. Some of them as old as 15.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes, that is very crazy.
Yeah, they're beyond a decade. But what
Because they
but
were
it's like,
born in 2010.
yeah, but for some reason we don't start talking about generations until they hit like high school, middle school, high school.
See?
And so like they're right at that cusp, and so now we're starting to talk about them. You know, everybody thought Gen Z was the youngest. Turns out Gen Z's old now.
In
They're done.
2010, I was too busy with the Rangers. Same next year, so I don't have time for new generations yet.
Yeah, I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. You know, I've got several stacked up behind me at this point, and it's starting to make me feel old.
Same.
Yeah,
I didn't
millennial.
appreciate in the message being lumped in with the old people.
No, I loved it. I loved it, and I think it made
32, everybody.
it made it very apparent in the Generations video when you did Soulja Boy.
With a J. Wes, would it make you feel any better?
I don't have many words today.
Oh, man. Okay, I know how to cheer you up before we get into the message. Would it make you feel any better if my wife was sitting next to me when he said how old he was, and she goes, oh, I thought he was older than that?
That does not make me feel
That's
better.
a good answer. She's going to be so mad at me.
Yeah, I was really hoping she was
She
gonna-
thought he was older than that?
She thought
You-
you.
What?
older than 49.
I present a strong 32.
Okay.
No, you don't.
Okay.
No, you don't.
I literally had somebody yesterday. I said, I don't feel like I'm almost 50. And they went, you don't seem almost 50. And I was like, thank you. I appreciate it.
But
You
they didn't
seem
mean it
almost
as a compliment.
60.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Whatever, man.
Crosswords in the Sudoku
Yeah,
in the
you're-
newspaper. I get it. I like that too.
You are the definition of old head, man.
Wait, sorry. I got to go get my knitting needles
Yeah,
so I
the-
can get through this
The
podcast.
bank card part is just like, it breaks my brain.
What?
For somebody
Oh,
that
about ordering
value-
pizza?
Yeah.
Dude, it is so much. I did this one time with my son. He said you could order it faster on the app. I challenged him to a duel, and I was off the phone. He was still trying to decorate half of a picture of a piece of pizza. I mean,
What was the price difference, though? Do you call up and you're like, hello, will you tell me about your specials today?
no.
Okay, well, then you're not
I
saving
call and I
money.
go, I need one large
I-
sausage, one large meat lovers, everything.
That'll be $85.
Yeah.
This is what my wife said when you said this in service. Caitlin looked at me and said really kindly, he should just get better at technology. We can order pizza in 2 seconds on the Domino's app.
No, there are some fast foods apps that are really good.
Yep.
And there are some.
Don't say what they are until we get sponsored.
Okay.
And then we'll
Okay.
Sorry.
make them pay for it.
Not the Domino's app, the unnamed pizza place in
there you
Lavon app.
go. There you
Mine rhymes with Schmeeway.
No one will ever figure that code out. All right, so these are the people bringing you the information today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the midst,
Feels very
Struggle.
spiritual.
we're in the midst of our Jesus Met series. Last week, Zacchaeus,
Yep.
Zacchaeus, and then
Wee
this,
little man.
this week. Okay, I asked my wife if she's familiar, and she goes, "Oh yeah, isn't he Tiny from the song?" So she absolutely knew what you guys were talking about. This week, I feel like we're shifting to, at least to me, one that I knew a lot more immediately. Where are we going today, guys?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Samaritan woman or the woman at the well from John chapter 4. That's what we're going to be diving into. And yeah, probably from an adult standpoint, this one we talked about last week is like Zacchaeus became one of those. It's like Noah and the ark, and Zacchaeus, and it's like it all becomes a coloring sheet and a
Yeah.
children's story. This one, while occasionally it became a coloring sheet, it's less of a children's story for sure.
Not as many coloring sheets with like the woman and like 6 guys.
No, yeah, that's
not a
not
thing.
that's not a thing.
You don't see a lot of adultery coloring books. do you?
No, that's not a good. It's a bad plan.
Bad plan.
Okay. So yeah, we're gonna be looking into this and her experience, which is one of my favorites. I've talked about it here several times. So we're kind of treading through some ground that I've had a chance to go through several opportunities, but we get a chance to go a little bit deeper in it. So I'm pretty pumped for that today.
All right, would you guys like to read through the whole thing again, and then chunk it through, or just go straight to?
Wes, I'm gonna let this be your call, man. You're the big guy.
Okay. We'll read the whole thing.
Okay, let's bring it.
John 4, 1 through 30.
Wow. Okay.
To listen to this voice for 30 verses. So
Yeah,
here we go.
you can put your podcast on double time and you'll get through quite twice as fast.
But only if you have fast ears.
That's
what
true.
I hear.
All right, John chapter 4, everybody. When Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard he was making and baptizing more disciples than John, though Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went again to Galilee. He had to travel through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" She asked him, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him and he would give you living water." "Sir," said the woman, "you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. So where do you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and livestock." Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life." "Sir," the woman said to him, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water." "Go call your husband," he told her, "and come back here." "I don't have a husband," she answered. You have correctly said, I don't have a husband, Jesus said, for you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. Sorry, turn to the page here. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus told her, Believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus told her, I, the one speaking to you, am he. Just then his disciples arrived, and they were amazed that he was talking with a woman. Yet no one said to her, What do you want, or why are you talking with her? Then the woman left her water jar, went into town, and told the people, Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They left the town and made their way to him.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent.
It's a great story. And so just kind of going back from the beginning of this, and I love how ultimately what I think is this story is incredibly relatable to most people. But it has this crazy ending that to me is my favorite part, and we'll get into that in a minute. But it starts out, Jesus is going on this journey. You kind of pick up in verse 3. He left Judea, and he went to Galilee, and he had to travel through Samaria. And I think that's one of the first moments that you want to pause. So we've talked about this a lot, as a church. It is the shortest route to get from one place to another geographically. There's no question about it. And Jews would travel through there, particularly if they were in a hurry or it was a time of festival season and things like that. But a devout Jew, particularly people who are like in the rabbinical field, like they're rabbis and stuff like that, they saw it as a potential to be defiled. So they went around all of this. And the reason they would go around Samaria is because they saw the Samaritans. The Samaritans were a couple of generations of if this was a Hogwarts episode, it'd be mudbloods. These are like blended. You familiar? Big Hogwarts fan?
Yeah,
or big,
huge.
Very Harry Potter guy.
Huge.
And so basically, what happened is that at one point, this area was run by Israel as part of the northern countries of Israel, and then the Assyrians came in and they attacked. The Babylonians at one point come in and attacked, but after the Assyrians attacked, the Assyrians remove all the Jews from that, but they left kind of the lowest class of people. They were very much a class society, and they left the lowest class of people there. And in leaving the lowest class of people there, those people, which were also the least educated, most impoverished, most dependent on whoever was taking over and taking charge, were the ones that blended with Assyrian culture, Babylonian culture, ultimately Roman culture, and they married into these things. Which marrying people from different geographic regions is not a sin or a problem. It had to do with idolatry for them, and so what happened to them consistently was that they were. They were creating a problem because they were blending gods together, essentially. So they're bringing in certain aspects of the Christian faith or the Jewish faith that they had known, and then they're bringing in these other things of the faith. And in the process, it's kind of like anything else. When you start to bring a bunch of stuff together, it gets messy and it gets confusing. And it's not like they could go and fact check it against some sort of Bible database or even the Bible itself. They're starting to pass this down as a messy version of not even the gospel. It's just some Christian tradition, some Assyrian tradition, some elements of these various religions, and ultimately, because of that, they're a wandering people that don't really have a solid faith to anchor to, and that's kind of who they are. So instead of having a heart to go, well, I'll help these people.
Yeah.
The Jewish people went, nope, avoid them altogether. Let's get away from these people completely. And so they would go around the entire area if they had time to do that, and traveled actually quite a bit longer in order just to they went out of their way to avoid someone.
Do you guys get the sense, one of the things that I really like about this passage is it feels relatable because I know the landscape has shifted since then, but Judea to Galilee through Samaria, it almost feels like you can follow along with that journey. Like, I don't know if people follow along in their head or if they translate the Bible like that, but it feels really relatable to understand, like, now I know which way you were going. Now I know the path that you were taking.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the whole journey of Jesus' ministry, he ultimately doesn't. I mean, he walks around it a lot, but it's not a very big area. I mean, it's attainable. Like, it'd be like if you were like going like I hung around, walked around Rockwall, Rowlett, Saxe, Wiley. I mean, I didn't do a direct proportion, but it'd be like that. It's not a huge amount of space that we see contained really in the whole New Testament. It's a pretty small area until you get into the letters of Paul and he starts to navigate on the missional journeys. But in the life of Jesus, it's pretty small.
Yeah, then it's like he sends a letter to Laban. It's like a little bit further.
Right, yeah. For us, we go, well, that's dumb. Shoot him a text. But in those days and time, it's a heck of a journey, and it's not Texas. It's not flat. Like they had to really navigate some stuff in order to get there. And so, kind of first part is like he didn't have to travel through there, and that's what the part of the thing in verse 4. He had to travel through Samaria. He didn't. They regularly didn't travel through Samaria. The had to is the motivation of Jesus. It's not a geographic necessity.
He had to.
He had to. When we feel this pull to something for us, we're like, man, I have to say something. It's that kind of a compulsion. And then he goes into verse 5. So he came to a town of Samaria, Sychar, which is near the property that Jacob had given his son Joseph. And then it says Jacob's well was there, and then Jesus was worn out from his journey. We'll get to that part in a minute. So I printed out some notes just because I don't want to be the guy that forgets all this different stuff, because there's a lot that happens here. So this is an ancient city in Israel. Did you look into this a little bit?
No, go ahead. But I have a thought about the Jacob's well, but keep going.
Okay, so yeah, so just to understand like where this is all happening, where this is taking place, because I don't know about you, but when I grew up in school, like I felt like I learned world history, and then at church I would learn church history,
Right.
and I would learn world geography, and then I would come to church and learn kind of the Bible geography. And it wasn't until I was like in my 20s when somebody started going, "Do you have any idea how these overlap?" And I was like,
Not really.
"No,
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I just assumed there were two different planets these things were happening on." It was like it was like regular universe and the Marvel universe. Like that was kind of like the way that it was in my head.
Right.
Do you think he keeps dropping in all these pop culture references and
Yeah,
stuff
it's-
to feel younger?
I am. I'm trying to relate to the kids these days.
Text. I like the Marvel universe.
And I'm like, I don't know anything about Harry Potter or Marvel, and I'm feeling older.
Yeah.
You're feeling younger.
What are your feelings on the metaverse?
The who? Is that the thing that Zuckerberg owns?
No.
Metaverse?
I kind of get that though. That's not bad.
Okay. Anyway, so where he's going, where Sychar is so this is, it's known kind of for three things: the place of promise, the place of worship, and the place of sin. And I think these are all like relevant to the story today. So this is where, when you think about, like, we talked about kids stuff earlier, growing up, Wes, did you ever learn a song about a guy named Abraham?
Father Abraham. Is that the one?
He keeps
He had
going.
many sons.
It's like the Christian version of the Hokey
Pokey,
Pokey.
yes.
Right arm, left arm, right foot, left foot. Bob your head, turn around, sit down. It was all like, I know you guys are like,
I just want to point out that's 2 episodes, ladies and gentlemen, and 2 sing-alongs.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can keep that going.
so
Former worship leader right here. Just
yeah. Well, I
showing
didn't
off.
lead that song, but so Abraham is kind of the father of this movement of Jewish people and all this stuff, and he was the guy that was given the promise of, you're going to have offspring, and they're going to outnumber the stars in the sky, and ultimately that's where the nation of Israel and the Jewish people and all that comes from. That promise that God gives to Abraham happens in this place. So it is a place of enormous significance. Joseph, who we're going to know, Joseph goes on to be a royalty in Egypt. He's the son of Jacob. He has, Joseph's the guy with, the coat with a lot of colors and all that kind of stuff. And Joseph his remains are buried in this place. Like I said, when the kingdom of Israel, when Israel as a nation was divided into two kingdoms, for a while, this is the area that was the capital of the northern kingdom. So it's a place of promise because it's the place where Abraham was given the promise of you're going to be the father of many nations. It's also a place of worship. So Abraham builds an altar there. Abraham's grandson Jacob, Joseph's father, who I just mentioned, he builds an altar there, and he names his altar Mighty God of Israel. So this place is significant, even though the Samaritans are in it now. It was once occupied by the Jewish people, and it was a very important place. And then it was also a place of kind of known for sin, kind of for the Jewish people. A man named Shechem, which is actually the name of the town in later on, he lived in the city. He rapes Jacob's daughter Dinah, and then two of his sons avenge their sister by slaughtering a ton of the men in the city. This wasn't like what they were told to do. This was rage out of control. So this city is known for its sinfulness, but with the altars and all the other stuff there, it's also a place where they, at the same time, like reveal God's faithfulness. So it's a place of remembering sin, but also remembering that God is faithful and He has shown up for us in the past.
You guys might have to project just a little bit on this, but I've been thinking about this ever since last week with Zacchaeus and the woman at the well. Do you think along this journey, those were the specific people that Jesus was always going to meet and talk to? Or do you think he was like, because you said what a tough part of the world this was.
Yeah.
There will be people there who need me. Or did you think it was always going to be these two people?
Wes?
Yeah, I mean, thank you.
Sorry, I hope
No,
that's
no,
not off track.
My bad. Wes?
Okay. So, I mean, I think these are the people that the writers of the gospel, like John, that he wanted us to know about. But I think just to be reminded that more than likely on his way to meet the Samaritan woman, Jesus interacts with so many more people.
Yeah.
Like we have like the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
And it's by the Spirit of God, it's the revelation that God wants us to know. But also just to be reminded that like Jesus has 30 years of interaction with people that we don't have record of.
Yeah.
And the 3 years that we do have record of is essentially what God wants to reveal to us.
Yeah,
So
I can't remember how many. It's like 45 days or something is like all we get recorded of Jesus' life. So I think these are the ones that God's trying to highlight.
Yeah.
But it's not the only ones that He met.
Sure.
So, but I do think that there is a clear point that the writers, empowered by the Holy Spirit, needed us to hear about these. And I think for me, what it's such a picture of is that God is willing to save anybody. Like if you are willing to confess your sins, if you're willing to acknowledge Him as Lord, then we have a God who saves and who redeems. And there's not somebody who is so bad that God can't redeem them. Like to me, that's what I think it's a picture of. And I do think for Jesus, He had to get to these two people. But I also think He had to get to Kevin, and He had to get to Jason, and He had to get to Wes. And I don't know where we're on that agenda, but I do think I think every one of them is somebody He had to get to. Like He
Okay.
wants every person to know Him.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So it goes on in the text, just kind of breaking down what this place is and everything else. It says He had to travel there. In verse 5, so He came to a town called Samaria in Sychar, the property of Jacob, and given Joseph. And then Jacob's well was there, and Jesus was worn out from his journey, so He sat down at the well, and it was about noon. Now, you said you had something you wanted to say here.
yeah, so this is the kind of a fun theological place to go to. But just thinking about the story of Jacob, not going to get into all the details, but essentially you have this guy in the Old Testament who's fiercely independent his whole life. And then he has this encounter with God, and he wrestles with God.
Yeah.
Like there's an encounter where he physically wrestles with God. There's a lot of scholars that would believe
God punched him in the hip,
he did punch him around the hip.
around the hip.
There's your next topic.
Yep.
It says inner groin in the original language.
That is true.
I'm just going to say that.
So-
it gets,
Needless to say, my point is this. You have this fiercely independent guy that wrestles with God. And there's a lot of theologians that believe that that's what's called a Christophany or a theophany, where
Right.
Jesus shows up before He was born of a Virgin Mary. He shows up in the Old Testament. He shows up with Jacob, wrestles Jacob. And then for me, I go to this story and I go, Jesus shows up to a well that Jacob built, and he's going to run into a fiercely independent woman that's latched onto all of her ideas and all the things that, even in her answer later, like you see some of the manipulation or like hiding. And it's a reminder of like the same God that wrestled Jacob is the same God that wants to wrestle the woman at the well into obedience because he loves her. It's the same, like, I don't know. I couldn't help but like notice that connection of like the Jacob, there's a significance to that. It's Jacob's well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, without going too deep into that, because
That's what we're here for.
a whole nother story, but like Jacob screws up everything in his life and is in desperate need of forgiveness and redemption. And before he can receive it and fully even embrace it, he has this encounter with God where God wrestles with him. And it's what changes his name. So Jacob's name in that interaction is changed from Jacob to Israel, which is where we get that nation and that name from. And so they're here with a woman who needs to have God wrestle her into obedience and surrender and dependence, all those things. And she's living wounded. She's living with pain of her past. She's living with regrets of her choices and decisions. And she's been ostracized. And there's so many other problems. And the truth is, the thing she needs the most is the thing she's not pursuing. And so, the thing she needs the most pursues her instead. And it's just really kind of this poetic, beautiful moment of there being at Jacob's well, and Jacob's whole story was needing to have God wrestle him into this relationship. And here she is in the same place, needing the same thing, standing at the well of a person who they revered as a father of the faith. But the truth is, those fathers of our faith had really jacked up stories and found God's redemption. And that was cool.
Yeah. So in the same verse, it says that Jesus was worn out from his journey.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this is just a moment of being reminded of the humanity of Jesus, right? Like he's tired. And I think there's a verse in Hebrews that talks about like Jesus is able to sympathize with our weaknesses because he's experienced all of our temptations. And I just think about like for me, when I'm tired, when I'm worn out, is like when I'm most susceptible to doing something dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's going to show up at a well with a woman. They're the only two there, and he's worn out. And there's going to be there. I'm sure there's temptation there, but there's the humanity of Christ, but then obviously the Messiah side of Christ that we'll get to.
Yeah, that's one of the things we talk about all the time. Jesus was fully God, but he's also fully human. Like that's Emmanuel, God with us, the incarnation of Christ, stepping out of heaven into a human form. So he maintains the perfection of the deity and the power of the deity, but he goes through all the struggle and suffering that we go through. And that's why one of the things that's so cool about us is the Bible says that the God we worship, the Savior we look to, is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And so we get to go to God. When we say to Jesus, here's the thing I struggle with, he can go, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can relate to you. No other, I mean, that's not something you're going to hear from Allah. That's not something you're going to hear in another kind of religious setting. They're above and beyond and away. And Jesus is close and near and comes to. And it's just it's a whole different experience thinking about what Christianity is all about.
Last week, you guys made a really great point about why it was a sycamore tree. I mean, I know because it was, but also you explained it to me. When we get to hear so little about these days, anything in particular about why I needed to know it was noon?
Yep. It's a very important part of the story.
I figured it probably would be.
Yeah, so we don't get this in our culture. I've been fortunate to travel to some other places where you get a bit of a glimpse of it. Back in 2011-ish, I went over to Lusaka, Zambia, and we were there on a mission trip. And part of the thing that we were doing was helping drill water wells. You get down deep enough into what's called the water table, and you can get clean water up from the earth. Most of their cultures and villages would be set up on a river or a creek bed, and what you don't realize is not only is some of that water at times stagnant, if it's not stagnant, it's flowing, and there's groups of people and animals that are bathing in it, cooking in it, washing in it, animals, wandering through it. And it's just passing disease down this creek, down this river constantly. And so the source of water they need to survive is the same source of water that's killing them. And so we would go and help drill these wells, and it's deep, deep into the ground. And even through droughts, when everything else dries up, they could go get this water. So the setup of their life is they would get up really early in the morning. Because it's a long way to travel, and the water jug itself is heavy. It's definitely heavy when you fill it completely. And they would travel early, usually the women or children, and they would go early in the morning to get the water that they need for the day. And that's about all they're going to be able to bring back. And they come back to their homes, they prepare meals, they have water to drink, and everything is clean. And so it is the common thing to go at this time. It says about noon in the translation. In most languages, it says about the 6th hour, which is around the noon hour for us. So what that tells us is there's only 2 reasons for this woman, and we don't know yet, but we know as the story goes on why. There's only 2 reasons that she would be at a well at the hottest part of the day. And in that part of the world, that is the hottest part of the day. So the only 2 reasons, one would be an emergency. Some sort, something happened and we need water and we need it now. She is clearly not in a hurry from the text. Like, she sits and has a long conversations. There's no sense of urgency to it. The second reason would be if you were ostracized, and you had done something where you were on the outs with the society and the community you're in. So she has been shunned, essentially. And she has no part with them. A lot of times, some of the men would come early in the morning to the well because that's where all of the women were. And some people found their match that way in kind of their culture. And it's kind of like speed dating in, first century and stuff like that. So they would go and do that. And so she didn't want to be part of any of that. She'd been down that road, we're going to find out, several times before. And so this is all about her sin. And it's not just her sin. I think this woman was living in a situation of, to me, a bit of a form of abuse. I think she gets a real bad rap sometimes in the story as she's this terrible person. I think she's been around with some terrible dudes also that have taken no responsibility for anything.
Yeah.
And so she's struggling. And so she's there hoping, because nobody's going to be there. Nobody would be there at noon at a well. It's the hottest part of the day. It's when you avoid being out there. She's going expecting to be alone. And that's why it makes the point of telling us that. One of the other interesting things for me, though, in it, is there's a real good chance she's passed to the disciples on her way. Like we learn later in the text, the disciples are heading into the town. There's usually a pathway. And so the other disciples have probably passed her while she's coming. Don't know what that interaction was like. Apparently wasn't long, but she makes it down there, and it's just her and Jesus in the heat of the day to have this conversation. So it goes on from there. Wes, you want to pick up?
Jesus.
Verse 7.
Yep. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Give me a drink, Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. And then she says, how is it you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews don't associate with Samaritans. So we've kind of already covered this, but there was such a strict divide between Jews and Samaritans. It literally shocks her that he even speaks to her. I think that's, and I should back up. It's wild that Jesus is asking for something, right? Like the Samaritan woman shows up with a bucket for water, and Jesus says, give me water.
Right.
And I don't know. To me, it's just like a picture of, like, I don't know, that God wants us, that he wants a relationship with us. And it's just to me, it's almost like an invitation to relationship.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was cool.
Because he continues with the water analogy right after that. So that makes a lot of sense.
But he also, it's so much more intrusive than it even sounds, because he's not like he's just going, give you, would you go, like, I'm so exhausted I can't move, would you please go draw water from the well? He's essentially looking at her and going, like, give me, like, I want to drink from your, like imagine like you're drinking this water and you drink it halfway done and I go, hey man, I want to drink your water.
Right.
And you'd be like, well, I don't really want to share my water with you. And for them, this is another one of those kind of cultural things is a lot of times the Jews that would travel through there would pack their own dishes because they found it unclean to even share dishes with Samaritans.
Wow.
And so they wouldn't participate in that at all. And here's Jesus not just going, will you go draw me some water, but I want to drink from your cup. I don't have anything to drink with, and she's going to say that. So I need to drink from your cup. And it's such a personal, in your face interaction, and it gets her attention big time.
You want to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God and who is saying you give me a drink, you would ask him and he would give you living water. So really in this next section, I'm not going to read it all again. We can just talk through it, but Jesus is going to like start what I'll call like the slow reveal. It's just like this stair step interaction. And I love that because he doesn't just show up and go, I am the Messiah. Eventually he's going to, but he's going to let her figure it out. Like he's going to let her kind of draw close to him as he goes. So she obviously realizes, kind of like you said, like he doesn't have a bucket. So where do you get this living water? And then Jesus is going to give this, to your point, Kevin, like this analogy of essentially a relationship with Jesus, and like a personal relationship with Jesus is living water. And then he says, if you drink from this water, you will never thirst again. So you want to kind of walk us through what that means?
Yeah. Before we get into that, though, so I wrote this quote down because I thought it was fascinating, and it was so sometimes these the Jewish people traveling through here would be called the bruised and bleeding Pharisees. So these are the other religious leaders, and they would be called that because they would often close their eyes when they saw any woman in public, and they would run into walls before it, and they would not engage in a conversation.
So as to avoid any possible temptation
Or the appearance of anything like that. And so they would not engage with a woman. They particularly would not engage with a Samaritan woman. So she's probably on her heels at the fact that he's even having a conversation with her. Plus, he's pushed further into, I need your help. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But he's also said, I want to drink from your stuff. Like, it's all of this is so counter. And that's one of the things that really stands out to me. Jesus approaches this woman, and it's so opposite of everything everybody else would have done. And I think sometimes that's so true in our faith that we need to respond to people differently than everybody else. Yep. And if we don't, man, they fail sometimes to see what she's going to see. She's going to experience Jesus because he starts from a place of being so different in how he approaches her. Like he's going to care about her. He's going to love her. He's going to talk to her. He's going to look at her. He's going to see her. He's going to acknowledge her. And so often when we don't like somebody, man, we don't do that stuff. Like we're not looking to purposefully engage often with people we don't really care about. But Jesus cares about everybody. So he's going to really press in. And then some people, I was reading one of these commentaries this morning, and some people would talk about, does Jesus diminish his glory by asking the Samaritan woman to cooperate with him? Almost like, well, he can't do this for himself, so therefore he must not be as strong and as great as we think of God. And I would go, man, that is a bunch of bull. I mean, we often see God engaging us, asking for cooperation from us, not because he needs our cooperation, but because we need our cooperation. Yes. We need to participate. We need to be a part of what's going on. And I think that's a big reality that is setting in. And one of the things that one of the things that I think is reality about John chapter 4, John is so aware that the audience reading this would have understood how awkward this is, that he doesn't explain any of this. Like, he knows that the audience that's going to, like, if he would have started a story going, Jesus talked to this Samaritan lady.
Yeah.
Like his audience would have been,
Everybody. Yeah.
what? That is like insane. We read it all calm and churchy and everything like that, but that is not at all what would have been going on at that time. Like they would have been floored by this whole thing. And so it's really important that we kind of get that concept. And so then, like Wes was saying, he's talking about this idea of the water and that he's getting into. And I believe it picked up. Where'd you leave off? Verse 11.
Yeah, I was all the way through verse 14.
Yeah. So he says, "Yeah, you don't have." She says, "You don't have a bucket. Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks from this water will never get thirsty again. But whoever drinks from this water I will give him will never be thirsty again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water that springs up in him for eternal life." And so what he's getting at is, man, when you go to a regular well, you're always going to end up being thirsty again. And he's going to go, I want you to come to a well where when you drink from it, you are never going to be thirsty again. Like, come connect to this, that is going to be something different. She's used to going out every single day to get more water. And he's presenting her with something that just sounds so eternal instead of so temporary. And that's really kind of where they're getting from. And I think one of the things that we get wrong on this is sometimes we think that what that means is that I drink once from this water and I never need to drink again. I think that's a messed up kind of image of what we're trying to get at. When we think of this in terms of like her thirst and her desire, what he's saying is, man, if you come and drink from this, then you're always going to you're going to keep drinking it. It's a daily experience of being connected to God. It's a daily experience of being filled with God. It's not that you drink one day and never get thirsty again. It's that after you drink once, you will every day drink, and you will every time go repeatedly having this relationship with God that you are constantly going back to, when everything else is a dry well. Like everything else is stuff that if you drink it and it dries up, you drink it and it dries up. And he's going, no, this is going to give you a different kind of thirst to come back to this over and over and over again.
I don't want to go too far back, but Wes, you talked about kind of the slow reveal. When the woman at the well says, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" Do you take that question at face value? Like, is she really asking, or do you think she's like, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm understanding who this person is, and let's see what he says."
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. She's kind of like tiptoeing around it in some ways, but I think she's the irony of like where she's at and who she's interacting with is not lost on her. Because like she could have said, "Our father Abraham, our father Isaac, our father Joseph, our father David." Like she could have named anybody in the lineage of Jesus. And she says, "Our father Jacob." So like she knows, I feel like she probably knows something is happening here. Eventually she's gonna know.
Clearly we don't know the real answer to that question, but I think she's trying to Jesus juke him. Like that's what I think's happening. I think she is straight up trying to like it's almost like this. Like, have you ever been around somebody who's been to church and maybe they haven't been changed by it? Like, God really hasn't altered their life, but they know the lingo well enough to just try to put. So Jesus is going, let's talk about living water. And she's like, what about our father? She's going to do this a couple of times as we move forward, where she's going to keep pivoting, almost like she was wants to go into a deep dive theological debate with this rabbi, which tells me she knows some stuff.
Yeah.
She's been around it. She's heard these things. She's heard these words. And yet she continues to keep pressing him a little bit more. And in the process, he keeps saying, "I want to give you this." And then she's going, "Are you saying da, 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 da?" And he's going to push in on her life. And she's going to again go, "Well, what about this?" It's avoidance, man. I think she's just trying to avoid where she senses this is going. And I could be totally wrong. Wes may have nailed it. I have no idea if I'm right. I'm just going I'm read this with a bit of a cynicism to it.
Yeah, and I probably just read it as someone who's clearly full of shame and then has a moment where somebody actually acknowledges that she exists.
Mm.
It's like she's lived her at least a good portion of her life thrown out of culture, thrown out of society. Nobody speaks to her, nobody talks to her, and then there's this guy at a well, and he starts a conversation with her. So for me, I go, if that was me, that would trigger something in my brain that something is different
Yeah.
about this person.
Yeah, may very well. So what happens in verse 15 is that she says, sir, the woman said to him, give me this water and I won't get thirsty again. So she's still thinking about actual water.
Actual thirst.
She's still playing checkers and he's playing chess, and so he's wanting to connect her to something that's a source for her life. And so he says, okay, well, go call your husband, which, to be honest, is culturally appropriate. Like, it would have been inappropriate for him to have this conversation with her, but even if she had been a Jewish woman, typically in their culture, it would be inappropriate for this man, this single man, to be having this conversation with somebody else's wife. And so he says, go get your husband, and then we'll talk about this together, essentially. And she says, I don't have a husband, which is true.
I mean, Jesus says it's true.
Ish.
Jesus says
that's
what
the
you
check-
said is true.
It's
Yeah.
true. Ish. You said, it is true. You said it correctly. I don't have a husband. And then Jesus doubles down on this and goes deeper. For you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. So, ish, because she goes, I'm not married. And he goes, yeah, but here's the rest of the story.
And this is right here the pivot point. Like, they're not dancing around it anymore. He's like, yes, correct. Here are all of the things that I know.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's not as ambiguous anymore. Like, they both know
Yeah.
what's happening.
Well, and she's been going back to this source, this well of sorts, to find some sort of fulfillment. And for her, it has been relationships. And these relationships have ultimately come up empty. And so I said this in a message not long ago. I don't think he's trying to make her feel bad. I think he's trying to identify the dry well she keeps going back to. And so he identifies it. And then immediately she gives him a bit of props. She still doesn't, I don't think she fully knows who she's talking to still, because she says, sir, the woman replied, I see that you're a prophet. So gives her a little bit of honor. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say the place to worship is in Jerusalem. So that to me is where I go, again, it's weird. He goes, let's talk about all of the men that you have been sleeping with. And she goes, oh, interesting. Let's talk about places to worship. That's not the appropriate response to
Right.
that. You know what I'm saying? She's,
Is that not how you would have responded to that, Wes?
It is not how I would have responded, but he's going to speak into probably the deepest pain in her life
yes.
in that moment, and she is immediately going to run from it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, this is like Jesus goes, I'm going to speak into this really hard thing in your life, and she's like, no, thank you. Where am I supposed to worship?
Yeah. I mean, we all do that, right?
Yep.
Deflection.
God pushes in on the hardest thing in our life, the most difficult thing for us to hear, the one thing we don't want to acknowledge to anybody else, and we don't like acknowledging even to ourselves. And he pushes in on it, and we go, thank you for sharing. I am out of here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because we're afraid.
I'll go to Bible study.
Yes, yeah. I'm going to get exposed. We're convinced we're going to get exposed instead of transformed.
Yep.
And
But what he's doing, I think, here is just a lesson in our life we have to know is that God is not going to heal things in the darkness.
no.
And it's his. So a lot of people would read this interaction as like this is almost a shame-filled thing that Jesus is doing to her, but it's actually his grace to reveal it so that he can heal it. Like well,
Yes.
that rhymed. Write that down.
Man, you nailed it. I'm going to get a shirt done.
Yeah, please do that. But I think it's his grace that says, I already know this about you, and if we could get to this, you could experience living water.
Yeah.
Like the way he describes it, which was very convicting to me today, was water that springs up in you like in eternal life. And I'm like, how many times could I be described as like sprung up with eternal life? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's just like springs out of
I have a hard enough time springing up out of this chair when we get done.
Same.
49.
So I don't know. I think that like in a world where when people talk about Christianity,
In a world.
in this world where people talk about Christianity as like potentially like woman degrading or like not valuing women, I think what you see in this story is Jesus over and over values this woman more than anybody else in her life.
Absolutely.
And then in this moment reveals some of her darkest secrets in this conversation only for the purpose so that she could have redemption.
Yeah, what so often we fail to realize is that our transformation comes through confession. But confession is one of the ethics of the Christian life that we either think we have to do one time when we're first saved, or never. And the truth is, it should be a continuing ethic in the life of the Christian, is that we confess. We don't confess because God doesn't know. We confess so that we can acknowledge it and be set free from it.
Yeah, and what's wild here, he confesses for her.
Yeah, he does it on her behalf. Like, it'd be like me walking up to like one of you guys and be like, I would like to tell you what all your sins are so that we can have them go to God.
I would also deflect from that person in that moment, right? I'd be like, "Oh, tell me more about your favorite TV show or whatever." Yeah,
Right. And that's exactly what I see here. And so then what happens next is Jesus says, believe me, woman, an hour is coming. So he's going to address her worship question. And her worship question, she's not wrong. Like, there was this mountain that the Samaritans would worship on. The Jews went in and burned down their temple. And it's part of like, why they'd gone back and forth and all this stuff. And so he's going to like kind of anchor the conversation where he's going to go, Jesus told her, believe me, woman, there's an hour coming when you will worship the Father, neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, is now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And so, like, a couple of things that are so cool there. Like, I said this in a sermon, but like the word for worship in the Old Testament and in some of the New Testament was always anchored to like a geography, like a place, an orientation towards a temple or anything like that. This is a time when Jesus is going to say that word, and then he's going to change the definition. So he's going to now anchor worship not to, that's what she's saying, should I worship in this place or this place? And he's going to go, there's a time coming and a now come. And what he means is there's a time coming, the cross and the resurrection, revelation of the Messiah, but there's a time that has now come. In other words, I'm standing in front of you, where you can worship in spirit and in truth. And it's not based on geography. It's not based on a place. It's based on a person. It's not about where you worship. It's about who you worship. And so for the rest, how you worship, and the rest of the Gospels and all of Paul's letters are barely ever going to mention that other word for worship again. Like it's like 4 times in the rest of it until you get to Revelation. And so it's going to be, it's this redefining what worship is. It's not a music style. It's not a band. It's spirit and truth. And so it's this, what do you, like, if Kevin, if you had to go like, well, what does it mean for us to worship in spirit and truth? What would that mean to you?
Yeah, like in terms of book and I guess book smart and street smart, kind of like in terms of what did you hear? What did you learn? How did you practice it?
Okay. Wes?
Yeah. So I always think about 2 groups of people that I see in church world when I think about these 2 words. So like you've got the spirit worshipers. And listen, come to church on Sunday, you'll see them. Like, know them, right?
I'm one of them.
Yeah, like, and I love these people. Like, they're amazing people.
Baptist Costal, baby.
Yeah, or just Costal. So, like, you have these people that are, like, consumed almost with, like, the feeling that worship gives you.
Yeah.
Right? And those aren't bad feelings. Those feelings are from the Lord.
Yep.
But when they're disconnected from truth, they're just feelings. Because I can feel that way at a concert, right? Like, the truth is, we could have a worship service and play the right chord progression and have the songs at the right volume, and we could elicit an emotional response. Go to a movie, go to a play, listen to music like that, go to a concert, that happens. The thing that makes it unique to us is when it's combined with truth. Now, on the other side, this is the other group of people. You have like the truth people that are like, we can only sing these songs because they are filled with theology and they have a bunch of words that nobody knows what they mean, but we love truth. And I think what Jesus is saying in here, it's not like secret sauce, but it almost is. It's like this combination of worship where we go, I'm going to worship in a way that it affects me emotionally and spiritually, and it moves me because of the truth that I already know about God. And when we can combine those things, that's the place where what Jesus is going to define is a true worshiper. So like when we miss the truth and we miss spirit, we're missing what it means to worship. So I don't know. For me, I just like, one of the things I was listening to a podcast the other day. It's like Inception. Talk about a podcast in a podcast.
Oh, man.
But just
Like
the
the
idea.
Russian nesting dolls of podcasts.
Yes. But there is
What a less contemporary reference that was.
wow. Old head. There's power for me in worshiping with my people, like our flock of sheep here
Yeah.
at Crossroads.
Our church.
Our church, yeah. I like flock better.
Okay.
We're dumb. Sheep are dumb, man. But like there's power that comes with that. But I think so much of it is because I'm surrounded by people that I know that are filled with the Spirit of God and passionate about the truth of the Word of God. And that's where true worship happens.
Yeah, and pragmatically, you think about somebody. If you were watching sports, okay, we all love sports, and you said
You're a
that
sports
person,
guy, I hear.
yeah,
Yeah, I do care for sports.
If you said that, I mean, I love the spirit that guy brings to the game.
Yeah.
Like you're going, man. There's a passion. There's an intensity. They're team oriented. Like they put the work in. They go out there and they execute it well. They do like these are like and they're man, it's what they're about. Like and to a certain degree, obviously there's a deeper theological level, but like that's kind of what we're saying. Like these are people who are like for God, excited about what God is doing, mobilized to be a part of what God is doing. They're passionate about His purposes and all that stuff. But the key is it's a both and. It's anchored also to the truth. So they're not just impassioned; they're impassioned for His mission, His truth, His word. It's not that they're just excited and want to be a part of it. They want to be a part of what God is doing in the world. And so it's spirit and truth that both of them are being brought into this. And I'm gonna skip to the end of this story here for a minute because I love this part. What are you looking at?
Sorry, I'm going to back up because I just love that she avoids the question, like the whole interaction with Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus' response is, I'll answer your question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like it's just like a really cool thing. I think just part of the interaction where like he could go, can we talk about your husbands again? And he doesn't. He's just like, oh, you have a question about worship? We can talk about that. And we'll get back to this other thing in a minute.
Because your transformation is going to come from knowing Jesus.
Right.
Like He can sit there and make her feel terrible about all this stuff. And yes, we should feel convicted by our sin, but we feel conviction not so that we can live in guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are short-term motivators, and guilt and shame are not tools that God uses. God uses conviction, not guilt.
And even if they were, He knew at that moment that's not what she needed, right?
Absolutely. See, she needs a relationship with God. Like, It's like if you're going to fix somebody that's an addict, they don't need you just to say, stop drinking or stop doing drugs. Right. There's a deeper issue that they need. And if you address the deeper issue, then it transforms the other stuff in their life. And the same is true for us spiritually. She can throw smoke and mirrors in front of him all day long. And Jesus is going, can we talk about what this is really about? Because when we get to that, it will resolve all these other identity issues that you're dealing 100%. With. Like this is what's going to be I'm glad you went back to that. It's so true.
All right, now jump to the end because the end's the best part.
Yeah. Well, so the part that I just love that she runs into she has this experience with Jesus. It changes her life. She runs into town to the very people who had minimized her, ostracized her, that she was shunned from, and she says, "Come and meet a man who tells me everything I ever did." Like you said this earlier, like if I could do that to you, you'd be like, I would change the subject.
Yes.
Too. I would run. Like I would be out of here. Like nobody wants to feel exposed like that. The only reason this changes for her is if being exposed in your sin or being exposed from your sin is actually the thing that brings you freedom. Like so many of us are bound by our sin because we keep it in the dark and we try to carry the weight alone. She gets hers exposed, and also she feels forgiven. She feels connected to him. Good.
All right, now you can jump to the end.
Yeah, so what I love about this story is what it does to her. And so she runs back into the same town that she's been shunned from, that she's been almost exiled from, the place where she has no community. She's not spending time with any of these people. And she runs back into town and says, "Come meet a man that tells me everything I ever did." the same sins that were keeping her outside of the community, she's now running in going, I met somebody who knew all these things, and she is using it to create community. It's amazing to see the switch in here, because so often, and I think this is where the church gets stuff so screwed up, is that so often we think about someone like if you had your sin encountered by a Christian, a lot of times it's so mean, judgmental.
Aggressive.
What's that? Aggressive, confrontational, that you would go, man, I don't want that in my life at all. I don't feel better for having this interaction. And yet you see with Jesus so often, and you know, like we're doing the I Met Jesus series, she meets Jesus, and she has a totally different experience. Everybody else has been, I mean, her whole town has been telling her what a screw up she is. Jesus tells her where her life is falling apart, but she walks away with a completely different feeling. There's a way that he did it that she gets approached with a way that feels love instead of hate, forgiveness instead of condemnation. The whole interaction is different. And I wish as believers, we could always say that that's true of us.
100%.
Is not. Like sometimes the biggest obstacle in someone's life is that they have been confronted by other believers who were buttheads to them. And because we're also human and broken and all that stuff, but when we are actually like Christ, us being willing to have a hard conversation with somebody should bring them closer to a relationship with God, bring them closer to us and closer to community instead of further away. And if they're pushing them further away, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and there's a phrase that right before she runs into the city that I think is the game changer, and it's, she left her bucket. And I think it's just this, it's a picture of a woman who went to a well for water, who went back for the same thing that she would always go to, she didn't go home with water.
Yeah.
Like, it's a wild part of the story.
Yeah, the thing she came for.
Yeah, and she left it there. And to me, it symbolizes she left that past. She left her old self at that well and ran back into the city. And I think the reason that she's emboldened to run back into the city is because she knows that's not her anymore. That she, like that old person that they know, that person encountered Jesus, and now she's a different person.
Yeah. And what's crazy is she wants that for them.
Yep.
You guys come meet him. Come meet this man.
You guys who haven't spoke to me, don't have a relationship with me, and have thrown me out of community, you have to meet this guy.
Yeah.
Look what he could do for you.
Right. You get a glimpse of, like, she sees a different future ahead of her, and she hasn't at any point. She's just continued to go back to the same bad habits. She's gone back to the same broken things in her life. And for the first time, her eyes are open. Her sin is exposed. She feels freedom from it, and she can see a different future. And I truly think she's sitting there going, well, if I get that and they get that, everything about, I mean, it's not like she was going to go, you know what, I'm just going to pick up and move to Austin and everything is going to be better then. I'll get a fresh start. They didn't move communities. That wasn't a norm at all for them. So she now sees an existence that's totally different, all because she met Jesus. And it's a life-changing for her. It makes her a missionary instantly. Like, she just wants to tell people about it. And I love that because, man, that's my heart for my life, for us as a church, is that as people would encounter us, they would go, I'll never forget. And they know this story, and, you know, they've been super open about it. But we have a couple in our church Joanne and Henry, who I love them to death. And they do a ton of great work in our church, in our region ministry, and everything else. And I remember the first time I met them. I mean, both of them have been very honest. They have, drug issues in their past and things like that. And the first service they ever came to, they walked up to me after the service and said, hey, and I don't even know why they did this. They were just like, I want to tell you, this is true about us. And it just so happened, I can't remember exactly who it was, but there were 2 or 3 people around them that I said, hey, and like those people turned around. I said, how long have y'all been clean and sober?
Wow.
And they were like, oh, this many years, this many months, and then all of a sudden Joanne and Henry were like,
we're home.
Oh,
yeah.
This is not a place for perfect people. This is a place for people to come and meet Jesus and get it together. And they've been here ever since. And I think that's exclusively the story. Well, it's the story of every believer, but it's something that I hope we're always honest about here. Like, we are not better people than people outside the church. If you want to talk about sin, struggle, affair, adultery, pornography, addiction, name your sin, input any of them here. And there are people in this building every single Sunday that have struggled with that stuff.
Yeah.
And the difference in their life is not that they're better than anybody. The difference in their life is very similar to this woman at the well. They had been drinking from something that did not give them any source of comfort that lasted. And they met Jesus, and now they want everybody to know. And a lot of those same people turn around and they put it into ministries like counseling ministry and regen ministry, or they go into student ministry and kids ministry. And it's amazing so often how often we see people jump back into a ministry that in some way is connected to the life they were redeemed from.
Yeah. I think about just the idea that, like, she goes and tells people, and like, what a challenge for us. Cause like,
She went to seminary first. She went to a local Bible college.
Yeah.
And
She
after
didn't.
she had a strong theological background,
We skip those.
and she was
ones.
there's a
And-
section in there where it says that she got her MDiv, and then she went on mission.
but
Right.
she didn't.
Oh,
And she
I
didn't.
missed that part.
And I think the other part that she didn't do is she didn't lead with all the benefits. Because, like, I think oftentimes in the Western church, we're really good at telling people what they can get from Jesus. And she doesn't go, look at this guy that can give you living water. Like, that's not what she says, even though that's what she's experienced. She goes, hey, he can tell you everything you've ever done. And it's great, but honestly, that's the challenge of the Christian life.
Yeah.
And I think more people in our world are apt to follow Jesus if we would lead with the challenge of it and less the benefits of it. Because we can find the benefits, some of the benefits, in other places. But to find a place in our world that looks at us and says, you're wrong,
Yeah.
is almost impossible.
Yeah, that's not a picture of lordship. Like, when you're going, like, I want to give my life to God, I'm going to become a Christian to see what I can get out of God. That's not lordship. That's not surrender.
Well, it is lordship, but it's
You're the Lord
You're the
at
Lord.
that point. But it's the truth is, and this is something that is not talked enough about in churches. You don't come to become a Christian so you can see what you get from God. You become a Christian so that because He wants to get something out of you.
Yeah.
He wants to use your life for something. He wants your life to have an eternal purpose.
Good.
Man, I think that's a tremendous kind of summarization from both of you guys right there.
Dude, I'm going to tell you, Wes was killing it today. So, I was just filling some space at
I
times.
don't know about that. We want to talk about next week, where we're going next
Yeah.
week. You know where we're going?
The
woman
Oh,
Caught in adultery,
woman caught in the.
which sounds similar to this story. And in my brain sometimes gets mixed up with this story, but very different interaction and just another picture of God's incredible grace and challenge for us.
Yeah, it kind of. I just want to hit on something you said earlier. And it just so happened that we're going through these in this order. I was talked about Zacchaeus in week 1, but we're going to talk about the woman at the well, which is having multiple relationships that are not good for her. And then we're going to talk about the woman caught in adultery. You said something earlier. Some people think that the Bible is somehow anti or minimizing of women, and yet, how often do you see Jesus specifically having encounters with women?
A lot.
It's a ton. As a matter of fact, we've said this many times, like especially around Easter, is like the first woman who gets to hear the gospel from Jesus is a woman. The first person to present the gospel of a resurrected Jesus is a woman.
Listen, the women are declaring the resurrection while the men are locked in a room.
Yeah. The dudes are still scared
Yes.
at that point. And so I think that's such an important thing that as we think about I met Jesus, like this is a meeting that is there for everyone.
Yep.
That God values all of us, and He wants to use all of us. He's going to use this woman in this story that is, at least from the viewpoint of her community, the most broken among them, and He's going to use her to go and try to reach them. And I find it amazing.
So hopefully you guys will click on the next episode button.
Yep.
We'll just jump right there. I met Jesus. woman caught in adultery.
You got it.
All right. Catch up with us. Maybe even another episode this week is the rumblings. We might pick up the pace a little bit right here, and we'll be back. Crossroads right here on I almost said on 105.3 The Fan. That's not right.
105.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me finish that differently. I'm just so used to saying that. Back with your Crossroads podcast.
All right. See ya.